Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Del Russo. Many of you know me. I am the education coordinator for the Passaic County Bar, and I work with our executive director, Karen Corsi, to try to put these programs together. Today, we have a really cool one. It's great when we have one that people find interesting, obviously, and engaging. And I think this one will meet those qualities rather quickly. This is about forensic meteorology. And, I was talking to the presenters a little while ago. I tried a case in the late 90s, sexual assault case where the weather was relevant and things were quite different, as I'm sure they'll share with you. I had to prove in some aspect of my prosecution what the weather was that day. And I went over to Teterboro Airport and I subpoenaed the guy who records the weather for the planes that come in and out because he had, as a business record, he had an obligation to record the weather accurately and in a trustworthy way. So we put him on the stand and we were able to demonstrate what we thought the weather was in Halden. But as you'll find out later, he was in Teterboro, so I'm not sure how credible that weather finding was. But we're going to hear from two people. We're going to hear from Kimberly Fisher, who's going to do an overview of forensic meteorology. And you're going to hear from Steve Roberts, who's going to give you a couple of case studies. And the context in which this arises is, generally speaking, civil practice, where the weather is highly relevant. You will be well taken care of because both Kimberly and Steve are highly credentialed meteorologists, and they not only work with lawyers, they've worked on some of the big sporting events of our time where weather matters and what the future weather is going to be affects, some billion-dollar industries, that's for sure. So before I hand it over to Kimberly, I just want to let you know that we have another program coming up on April 15th. So make sure you file early so you can watch our program. And that's going to be on elder law, and that's April 15th. And of course, we're recording this program and we'll record that elder law program as well. And they'll be available for you on our YouTube channel. And for your friends and colleagues who couldn't make it today, they can always watch that and fill out the registration form and get the same credits. Although you can only have so many credits that are non-live, video recorded credits. But, we have a YouTube channel. There's a few other programs on there as well that we did over the past 2 years. So in any event, I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly Fisher.
All right. Thank you so much, Joe. And again, we really appreciate you all being here with us today, taking the time to learn a bit about the value of forensic meteorology in litigation and how using a weather expert can help in certain cases. So again, my name is Kim Fisher. I'm a business development and sales associate at CompuWeather, but I do have a degree from Cornell University in atmospheric science, aka meteorology, just a different term for it. And I did work in weather forecasting in that part of our company for several years before moving into the forensic side of things. And I'm here with Steve Roberts. He's the president of CompuWeather and also one of our lead weather experts. And he will present two case studies later on in the webinar after I give you an overview of the cases that we work on, services we provide, some unusual cases that we work on, which I always find interesting. To hear about these cases where you wouldn't expect weather to be involved, but it somehow is. So thanks again for being here. Oh, and just another note, we are located in the Hudson Valley of New York, so we are pretty local. We do a lot of work in New Jersey, and specifically in Passaic County. So we're really happy to be speaking to some local attorneys. So who are we? Some of you I believe we've worked with, and some of you may not have heard of us previously. We're a forensic weather company, and our weather experts provide expert consulting services and detailed site-specific past weather reports for legal professionals. And we do also work with insurance companies and structural and forensic engineers, but attorneys make up probably about 70% of our client base. We've been around since 1976, so quite a while. And as you can see, we've worked on quite a few cases and claims over the years. And Steve and Jim are experts, which I'll get into them on the next slide. They're both quite experienced, um, having testified together, combined in over 280 trials and depositions in both state and federal courts. So they certainly have a great deal of experience in the courtroom. And as a note, we work for both plaintiff and defense, whoever comes to us first. It's pretty much an even split between who we work for. A lot of times we get that question, oh, do you work for more defense or more plaintiff? But it's about pretty even. So Steve is here with me today, and just our other weather expert, Jim Bria. They're both certified consulting meteorologists, and that's a seal that's earned through the American Meteorological Society. And it's considered a seal of excellence in the field. It demonstrates a certain level of experience and knowledge. And to earn the seal, they have to undergo a pretty rigorous both written and oral exam. So it's definitely something that was hard earned and well deserved as well. Um, Steve and Jim together have close to 40 years of experience as professional meteorologists and weather experts. And again, as I mentioned before, they both testify regularly, are deposed regularly, so they have a strong understanding of how the legal process works. And I'm sure, as you all know, weather can often be an important part of a legal case. And many different types of cases involve weather as a significant factor. So these are the types of cases that we most commonly work on. Slip and falls, that probably makes up about half of the types of cases we work on, maybe even a little bit more. But then we do work on quite a few cases involving wind damage, property damage due to, flooding and heavy rains, car and truck accidents, other types of personal injury, maritime and aviation cases, construction delays and defects, hurricanes, tornadoes, hail, things like that. So those cover pretty much the most common types of cases that we come across. And for these types of cases, we can figure out what the weather conditions were at the specific time of the incident and also over the days prior. We can also search back weeks, months, or years, depending on what sort of information you need. Now, for personal injury cases, obviously slip and falls, we can give you the specific timing of precipitation at a loss location and also let you know if there was a storm in progress, if snow or ice cover might have been present on untreated, undisturbed surfaces, or if surfaces may or may not have been wet, if it's a slip and fall due to rain being tracked into a building. And of course, if it was snowing at the time of the fall, that can be important for a defense attorney or for a plaintiff attorney. Even if there's an ongoing storm, potentially we can let you know if there was any pre-existing snow and ice cover that might have still been present. So, depending on what angle you're trying to figure out, we can provide you with that sort of relevant information when it comes to a slip and fall. Then for wind cases, we can analyze forecasts and advisories to determine if there was notice. A lot of times, if there's a wind injury, one that we kind of get often is like a patio umbrella or a beach umbrella that wasn't properly secured and unfortunately blows away and hits somebody, injuring them. So notice is often very relevant. Where strong winds in the forecast. Sometimes somebody will say the gust just came out of nowhere, and well, we can tell you if it came out of nowhere or if it was actually expected to be a strong wind gust that day. And we can also tell you what the wind speeds were in that case. And then for a car accident or a truck accident case, we can establish if it was precipitating at the time of the incident, rain, snow, sleet, freezing rain, etc. If the weather might have created any sort of water ponding on roadways and could have caused a vehicle to hydroplane, or if black ice might have been present, or if a sudden thunderstorm or snow squall occurred. Sometimes those can suddenly move into an area, affecting visibility. We can also let you know if fog was present, what the visibility was due to the fog, and if any of those conditions could have been foreseeable. Sun glare as well. Sometimes we work on cases where a driver strikes another car or strikes a pedestrian and claims that the sun was in their eyes, so they couldn't see. We can provide sun angle information to help you determine if that's actually true. Then we also work on quite a few types of property damage cases. And again, going back to wind, we can let you know what time, the peak wind gust occurred, how strong they were, what the peak sustained wind was, along with the peak gust, since those are two different types of things. If it's possible that you need to know if the winds were due to a thunderstorm, straight line winds is what we would call that, and then a tornado obviously has more cyclonic winds, and we would be able to sort that out using Doppler radar if that's a matter of coverage in a case. For flooding cases, we can calculate how much rainfall occurred at a particular location and how unusual a rainfall event was, such as how unusual 1 in 100 year storm, 1 in 200 year storm. That's called the average recurrence interval. And so we'll be able to tell you if the rain that fell during a given period of time was normal, this has happened before, or if it's fairly unusual. And Steve will get into that because one of his case studies is about a flooding issue. And a lot of times with these cases, somebody will construct a new development, a housing development, and then all of a sudden a neighbor's property floods. So then they're trying to figure out if the changes to the property and the local infrastructure were responsible for altering drainage patterns and causing flooding, or if the event that caused flooding was just a catastrophic rainfall event. Then hail, obviously not as common in the Northeast as other parts of the country, but it's a big deal in a lot of other areas. We can verify if hail really did fall at a specific location during a given time period and if it was large enough to cause damage. That piece often will require an engineer to assess the damage, but we provide the hail likelihood and size, and then the engineer would use that in their assessment. And our hail reports cover 1 day all the way up to years, depending if you're searching to see when hail events may have affected a particular property. And our experts can also do a deeper dive into the Doppler radar images for a particular date to further assess a hail event. Then snow load cases, that heavy snow pack can cause roof collapses, structure collapses. We can figure out how much snow had fallen so far during a given winter season, what the maximum snow depth was, and when that did occur, and also what the liquid equivalent of the snow load would have been at the time of the roof collapse. Obviously, there's a difference in weight between fluffy, dry snow that falls when it's 15 degrees out and heavy, wet snow that falls at 31 degrees. And we definitely experienced both types of storms this past winter, some easier to shovel than others. And so obviously that can make a big difference when it comes to, weight accumulating on a roof. Then we do also work on maritime cases. We do have a separate dedicated maritime weather expert, Fred Pickart, and he works on our maritime issues. He has a very good knowledge of maritime weather issues that come into play. These types of cases can include personal injury out on a boat due to high winds or rough seas, ship collisions, vessel sinkings, salvage claims, cargo damage, anything relating to the ocean. He can provide information regarding winds over the ocean, precipitation, sea and wave heights, currents, swells, and obviously forecasts if it was an issue due to bad weather and rough seas, if that had been forecasted and expected. We can work on maritime issues generally all over the world. And we also can work on incidents that occur on rivers and on the Great Lakes as well. So not necessarily just oceans, but a lot of the maritime cases that we get do occur in the ocean or sometimes near shore, but still in the ocean. And then we also have a dedicated aviation weather expert who works on our aviation cases. Dan Pagliaro is his name. And for that, we will work on cases involving obviously turbulence, which causes personal injury to passengers, any sort of crash, whether it's a plane crash or a helicopter crash, and then even property damage to planes as well. And so we have access to not only weather data, what's going on at ground level, but also upper air data. And that's obviously usually important to analyze in these sorts of aviation cases. And we work on hurricane cases as well. Obviously, sometimes hurricanes, tropical storms, and their remnants can affect the area, such as with Sandy back in 2012 and Ida in 2021. And in our area, flooding issues, of course, tend to be more of a problem than strong wind speeds, generally. But we can provide site-specific information regarding wind speeds, rainfall amounts, and storm tide levels, which that's the storm surge level plus the normal tide level. And we offer two different types of products for that. One is map packages. Typically, engineers order that rather than attorneys, but that essentially provides an overview of the impacts of the storm over a larger area so that engineers can see which areas are the hardest hit. And then typically what attorneys will order is a hurricane timeline report, which shows over the course of the storm an hour by hour graph or chart depicting, what the wind speeds were like each hour, both sustained and gusts, the peak sustained and peak gusts, also how much rain fell each hour, and then again, if it is relevant, if it's a property that's right along the coast, the storm tide levels for each hour as well. And, we've worked on basically every storm that hits the United States. We do produce hurricane maps and timelines for. Of course, the last couple were back in 2024 with Milton and Helene. No tropical systems made landfall in the United States last year, which is pretty atypical. So we will see what happens this year. But whatever happens, hopefully the remnants will not come up through the Northeast, since there can definitely be some major issues when that happens. So that covers the most common types of cases that we work on, but I like to just go over, because I think it's fun and interesting, the unusual cases where you think, huh, I guess weather actually is a factor here. So for one of them, we were retained by a plaintiff attorney, and they were representing a boat building company. So they had painted a boat, and the paint peeled off fairly quickly. So the boat builders sued the paint company, saying, "You must have given us a bad batch of paint since it peeled off so rapidly." The paint company countered and said, "Well, you must have just not painted the boat under the correct weather conditions." They said that it needed to be applied at a relative humidity below 85% and also at temperatures above 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And so our expert researched the temperatures, dew points, and relative humidity levels for the 2-week time frame during which the boat was painted. And turns out that the weather conditions were correct. They weren't painting it during while it was raining, or if it was, 10 degrees. So that ended up being favorable for our clients, since it pointed to the fact that possibly the paint indeed was a bad batch. Then for this one, in summer of 2021, parts of the Pacific Northwest were seeing record high temperatures that lasted for several days. And unfortunately, this caused several deaths, including the death of a nursing home resident. And so we were hired by an attorney representing the elderly woman's family to provide a weather report containing temperatures that actually occurred during the heat wave, as well as heat advisories or warnings that would have been present, and also the forecasts that have been issued. The nursing home facility became extremely hot since there were no air conditioners inside. And so this poor lady died due to heat stroke. And our report helped her attorney, since it showed that this heat wave was expected. There have been, warnings, advisories that have been in the forecast for enough time that they could have taken precautions to either evacuate the residents or, somehow get them a better cooling system. So that one also was favorable for our client. And we occasionally work on criminal cases. Not too often, but sometimes it includes trying to figure out if somebody's testimony is credible or not. So in this case, our client was trying to discredit witness testimony that there were icicles hanging from a building. Our weather expert looked at the recent temperatures and precipitation at the location in question to see if conditions were conducive for icicles to form. And our expert determined that there were likely no icicles present since it had been above freezing for over 24 hours. And also there was a lack of snow and ice cover. So you obviously need both snow and ice cover and then freezing temperatures at some point to create icicles. So therefore, it was determined that the witness might not have been entirely truthful. Just a quick overview of the types of services that we do offer. Our written reports contain weather information in an easily readable format, and it is site specific. So we're providing you with the weather that occurred at the specific loss location. And these reports are prepared and signed by our weather expert. We also offer phone consultations with an expert where you can speak with them prior to obtaining a written report. So this is very valuable if you don't want to have anything down in writing initially. You just want a verbal opinion first before, putting any words down on paper. Then we also can order for you certified data, also known as certified weather records. This often is used to attach to a motion or for use at trial. And we order that for you to make sure that we're including the correct stations that are most representative of your loss location. Now, that data is not site specific, so we don't ever advise only using that for a case, but sometimes it is needed again if you're, making a motion or for certain other things. Then we also offer consulting services such as reviewing affidavits, reviewing documents such as deposition transcripts, or photos. And we can always incorporate those details into a report if you need to have the expert review some documents first. You also may need us to review the opposing weather expert's report. Um, and Steve will touch a bit on the case studies that he will present. In both of those cases, there was an opposing expert's report involved, and so he'll talk about how he deals with that and potentially rebuts that as well. And of course, our experts are available for testimony and deposition if necessary. This is just very quick, just to show you like a part of our report, just in case you're curious about that. This is for a slip and fall case. And essentially, it gives you a narrative of what happened each day, if there was any precipitation each day, how much fell, the times during which it fell, and then how much snow or ice cover was present at the start and end of each day. Also, the high and low temperatures for each day as well. So, it's pretty comprehensive, and this reflects what happened at the specific location, not just at the nearest observing sites. We do look at nearby sites as well for information, but we use Doppler radar to figure out what happened at that specific location. And then the results are summarized in a table here, so it's kind of easy to look at a glance. And it's also displayed here in these charts as well. So that's kind of just the meat of a typical slip and fall report, just so you can kind of see how the information is displayed. Then for selecting a qualified weather expert, there's a few qualities that you should look for. One is education, as your weather expert should have a degree in meteorology. Sometimes people use engineers to obtain weather information, and there's always an issue of a Daubert challenge with that. So, we don't answer any questions that an engineer should answer, and the engineers shouldn't really be answering any questions that a weather expert should answer. So, if you're going to have an expert speak about the weather, they should actually be a meteorologist and have a degree in meteorology. Another is certifications. As I mentioned earlier, our weather experts are certified consulting meteorologists, and that's a seal, that demonstrates a certain level of knowledge and experience. And so that's always something good to look out for. If your weather expert has that, it's a good sign that they've been in the field for a while and are experienced. And of course, having previous experience testifying at trial and depositions is relevant as well. And our meteorologists are also affiliated with several professional organizations, including the American Meteorological Society, National Weather Association, and Association of Certified Meteorologists. Now, the last thing before I hand it over to Steve is just talking a bit about some mistakes that our clients can make that, are kind of easy to avoid. Um, Sometimes we engage too late in cases with attorneys. They decide to investigate their own weather, and then it kind of leads them down the wrong path. And then they come in at a point where it's too late to disclose an expert. So it's always good to get an expert. I mean, not even just a weather expert, but any expert involved earlier on in the case, so that you have time to disclose them, find out what actually happened, all of that. Also, sometimes the client will not disclose all of the weather-related facts surrounding the case, which means that the expert can't really obtain a full picture of what really happened. So it's essential to be upfront with the expert about all of the details so that he can provide a clear analysis. Also, using free weather data is not the best idea. You risk using stations that are inaccurate and might not be admissible. So from a site like Weather Underground, or like timeanddate.com, um, those, I mean, some of the data could be accurate, but you just don't know. And we only use data that is quality controlled by the government and can be certified, for use in court. So, there's no issue with us using data that's just from someone's backyard without being quality controlled. And as I touched on before, using certified weather data only for your case is not the best idea since it is not site specific. So again, at certain stages, as your case moves to litigation, you might need it. But we always advise getting a site specific expert analysis first, before ordering any sort of just data only. And lastly, thinking the weather is the weather is another mistake that sometimes can be made. You might receive the opposing weather expert's report and think, well, the weather is the weather. If I hired my own expert, he wouldn't say anything different. But chances are the opposing expert will leave out facts that could help your case and only include ones that benefit their side. And you'll see that in Steve's case study as well, I think particularly in the flooding one. So it's always important to get your own weather expert, and especially if there's one on the other side. Now I will hand it over to Steve Roberts, and he will present two case studies. The first one is about a slip and fall case, and the second one is about a flooding case. So thanks, Steve.
Well, thank you, Kim. Kim's done a great job here today giving us an overview of all of the different ways that a forensic weather expert can assist, or at least most of the ways. There's always some that, even some cases that come to us that tend to surprise us that weather's involved. But she did a good job of going over a general overview of a lot of the different types of cases and things that we can help out with as forensic weather experts. My job here today is to get a little bit more specific and dive into a couple of actual cases that I worked on. One's going to be a cold season slip and fall, which I think most attorneys in the Northeast are very familiar with. And the second one, maybe not so many cases, but it's a flooding case, and I think it's very interesting, and it certainly does show the value of using a weather expert for your legal case. But before we get started here, I did want to mention, well, first of all, my name's Steve Roberts. I am with CompuWeather. I'm a certified consulting meteorologist. I've been doing this since about 2002 as far as forensic weather is concerned. I became a certified consulting meteorologist through the American Meteorological Society in 2012, and I've renewed my certification a couple of times since, and been an active, what we call CCM, since then. But before we get started, I did want to mention that I did change, a few details in the case study just to protect the confidentiality of the parties that were involved in both of these cases. So to get started on the first case here, again, this is a slip and fall case, give you a little bit of a background on what the case was about. In this particular case, the plaintiff who slipped and fell argued the following claims, or through their attorney argued the following claims. First of all, that they had slipped and fell on snow-covered solid ice. So it wasn't just snow and it wasn't just ice. It was actually a snow-covered area of ice in the parking lot of a firehouse. I mean, this could be a parking lot anywhere. It just happened to be a firehouse where it happened. The plaintiff also argued, or the plaintiff's attorney argued, that the property owner had an obligation to keep that property safe, clear, and free of any slip hazards. I think we all know that it is the obligation of any property owner to maintain a safe egress in and out of, especially a public property such as a firehouse. One exception to that is, I think, as attorneys, in the Northeast, especially in New Jersey, it's somewhat new, but the storm in progress ruling, where if there's an active wintry precipitation event in progress, then you kind of, you have a little bit of an out on that in terms of not having to clear that until afterwards, and then there's the legal aspects of a reasonable time to clear that. Third on the list here is that the plaintiff argued that the slippery condition had been present for at least 24 hours before the incident, and that the property owner was made aware of the condition by the plaintiff, 24 hours before the incident occurred. So given all of this information, the plaintiff, through the plaintiff's attorney, argued both constructive and actual notice, meaning that it had been there long enough, somebody should have recognized it, and that they actually had said something the day before that there was ice present in this area. Okay, so specifically, what was I asked to do for this case? We at CompuWeather were hired by the plaintiff's attorney and asked to reconstruct the weather conditions for the incident so we could gain a better understanding of what was happening in terms of weather, with a focus on temperature, precipitation, pretty importantly ground condition, because the condition was claimed to have been ice that was underneath snow, and not just the date of the incident, but a lot of times it's important to look at the days before the incident, because that can kind of set the table for how those ground conditions may have come about. Last on the list here is that basically at the end of the day, we really wanted to focus on the likelihood and timing of any ice formation, because the claim was that there was ice underneath the snow, and that was probably more likely, based on the attorneys involved, that was most likely what caused the slip. Okay, so the meteorological investigation process, I'll kind of give you a little bit of a look under the hood here of the different types of data that we look at. Certainly, not a secret. We reference all of the data sources that we reviewed in our reports, and we will provide that data when we are assisting attorneys with a motion or any kind of legal action. That weather data can go along with it. So in this case, it gathered and reviewed all available official certifiable weather records for the general area in question. Now, Kim touched on this in her presentation, or early in the presentation. Here at CompuWeather, we only use certifiable, this would be NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, certifiable weather records, because we know as weather experts, we really can bring any weather data into a case that is generally accepted by the meteorological community. However, we're thinking ahead to trial and court, and there could certainly be a challenge on data that's not certifiable. Now, we know that certified weather records are admissible in the courts, even with or without a weather expert. So we know that those records are going to be allowed in, and if we stick to using only certifiable weather records, then we are guaranteed at that point that the courts will accept the data that we relied on for opinions in our analysis, which could be very important to the case. So specifically, what did we look at for this case? I looked at hourly and daily weather observations. Now, hourly weather observations, you can actually get these observations on a 1 minute basis. So they're actually even more robust than hourly. And on the 1 minute observations, I have access to that. Those are actually pretty hard to find readily available for free out there. But the hourly weather observations give us a lot more detail than the daily weather observations, which seems kind of obvious, but they do provide us with temperature, precipitation totals, liquid precipitation totals throughout the day. Also present weather, barometric pressure, wind speed, direction, humidity, dew point, wet bulb temperature, just about anything that you can think of is going to be in those hourly observations. and they're very thorough, and that's a very good data source to use. We also know that hourly reporting sites are not on every corner of the earth, so we also need to look at daily weather observations, which are a little less detailed, and those typically will include, at a minimum, they usually include at least liquid precipitation amounts, and then they also can include snow and ice accumulation for the day, snow and ice cover or depth observations, and a lot of times they'll also provide daily high and low temperature. Next on the list here is National Weather Service alerts, advisories, special weather statements. Those were reviewed for this case. Now, the Weather Service does have service areas around the country. Just every area of the United States is covered by a National Weather Service. That's their local forecast office. In Passaic County, you guys probably already know, but it's Upton, New York, or the New York Weather Service office that covers that area. They provide alerts, advisories, special weather statements, and all kinds of information throughout the day, keeping people apprised as to what's going on with the weather. Those can actually be helpful because sometimes they put out statements or information that might be in between the hourly or daily weather observations that can give us a lot more information when we're doing an analysis. Surface weather maps, those can be important or helpful for determining large-scale features, like was high pressure in control, was there a storm system or low pressure moving in, frontal boundaries, cold fronts, warm fronts, troughs of low pressure that might be in the area. It just gives us a general idea of what might be causing the weather that we're seeing on the data from a large-scale standpoint. We also reviewed, or in this case, reviewed National Weather Service storm events write-ups, which if there's a severe or unusual weather event, a lot of times after that event, the National Weather Service will do a write-up. And again, they will sometimes include kind of little nuggets of information or reports that we might not be able to get through the hourly or daily weather observations that we have. Satellite imagery, that's another piece of data that can be very useful. I've archived satellite imagery that we have access to. We can determine cloud cover at a particular location. It's a graphical representation of the cloud cover over an area, so we can see where a location might be on that map and determine when it's cloudy, when it's not. There are two different types of satellite imagery that we mainly focus on. First one is visible satellite imagery, which during the daytime is great. It's basically a picture of the cloud cover from space, and we have access to that. But at night, when the sun goes down over a location, which happens a lot, or for long periods of time in the winter, then we can rely on what's called infrared satellite imagery, which basically is a satellite that determines the temperatures of different cloud tops, and the higher up in the atmosphere that a cloud is, typically the colder that cloud top will be, and then we can determine low clouds from high clouds and things like that. We can also just see the clouds in general at night. Last on the list, and probably one of the most important pieces of information that we review, is Doppler radar data. It provides us with some pretty good information, and for this particular case, it would provide us with site-specific start and stop times of precipitation and intensity. One thing Doppler radar doesn't do is specifically tell you what type of precipitation is falling at any particular time. We mainly rely on the daily and hourly ground reporting sites to help us to determine the precipitation type that's actually reaching the ground. There are some Doppler radar characteristics that you can, and products you can use to determine precipitation type, but it's always best to get a ground truth or a ground verification of the type of precipitation that's falling. Okay, so not always the case in every legal matter that I work on, weather-related legal case. But in this particular case, I was provided with quite a few case documents to review. This can be very helpful. And in this case, I did review deposition transcripts from both the plaintiff and the defense. And this can be very helpful to basically gain a better understanding of the unique aspects of any particular case and what's going on, what each party is saying under oath. So obviously they're supposed to be being truthful. So you're getting some good information that can be used to kind of understand better what was seen and whether that really lines up with the weather analysis or not. In this particular case, the plaintiff's deposition transcript revealed that they did complain about the ice the day before the incident. And so they had given some actual notice. That's what they testified to. And in this particular case, the defendant's transcript was kind of very little background from a weather perspective, which does happen quite often with defendants' transcripts, because a lot of times they're not on the property during the date in question, or perhaps they just don't recall because it's been a few years or a year, and they don't really recall what the weather was like. And the defendant's transcript can be very useful to an attorney, maybe not so for a weather expert who's trying to understand the weather aspects of a case. Okay, additionally, I was also provided by the plaintiff's attorney that hired us. They also hired an engineer, and I reviewed the engineer's report. And the engineer had determined that the area where the plaintiff fell had a significant depression or a low spot where things had settled out, and where rainwater would collect to a substantial depth during rainstorms. Now, Kim touched on this, and when she spoke, is that, we're not engineers, we're meteorologists, so we will leave the engineering to the engineers, but we can rely on their expert analysis. So in this particular case, they're telling us that there's a depression in this area based on their analysis and their investigation, where water would collect, not only from rainstorms, but perhaps there was some melting snow or ice from a snow pile or something nearby. They also mentioned that would end up in this low area. The defendant in this particular case, or the defendant's attorney, also hired, they did not hire an engineer, but they actually hired a weather expert. And their weather expert determined basically that it was snowing at the location of incident at the time of incident, which would be detrimental to a plaintiff's case. And they also argued that no ice was present at the time. They also said in their analysis that it was the first snowfall of the season, therefore there'd be no opportunity for any melting and refreezing of any pre-existing snow or ice, because this was the first wintry precipitation or snowfall that occurred that winter season. Okay, so my summary of my weather conditions, or the analysis that I did on this particular case, was that, first of all, I determined that no snow or ice had occurred this winter season prior to the date of incident, which actually lines up with the other weather experts' analysis. Also in line with the other weather experts' analysis was that I determined that 1 inch of snow fell on the date of the incident. It was actually snowing at the time of the incident, as the defendant's weather expert had also concluded or determined, and also that the temperatures below freezing all day, and that the precipitation was entirely in the form of snow. So that kind of raises the question then, okay, so if there's nothing pre-existing, it's all snow falling at the time, well, how could there have been any ice? My analysis, I took it back a little bit further than the other weather expert, and had seen and determined that approximately 1.5 inches of rain fell about 4 days prior to the incident. Temperatures were above freezing during that rainstorm, and for about 2 days after. Temperatures then fell below freezing the day before, about midday or late morning on the day before the incident, and stayed below freezing through the time of the incident. So I think you kind of see where we're going with how ice could form. The sky was also cloudy on the day before the incident, as well as the day of the incident. So you're not going to have any heating from sunshine based on the fact that it was cloudy. Okay, so final opinions and conclusions on this particular case was that the plaintiff's initial claim, again, was that they slipped and fell on snow-covered ice. And we know it was snowing at the time. If it was just snowing at the time, there was no way there could have been ice, then obviously that'd be a pretty classic storm in progress defense. However, snow-covered ice at the time of the incident was basically covered up by ice that formed underneath, and the engineer's report and analysis was very helpful to me, and between the two of us, we were able to show that 1.5 inches of rainfall that fell 4 days prior, would have ended up settling, and then there's a plausible or a consistency between the plaintiff's testimony that there's ice underneath snow, based on the fact that the 1.5 inch of rainfall would have likely ponded in that low spot and then froze on the morning prior to the incident, which again ends up being about 24 hours prior, ends up in alignment with the plaintiff's testimony that they saw ice in that location the day before. And then obviously at that point you have a snow event that starts up that day and starts to accumulate on top of that ice. And I think as an attorney, you could even argue that snow covering up ice is masking a very dangerous condition. Because I think we all know, living in the Northeast, if you ever stepped on a frozen puddle that was covered by snow, you kind of know what happens at that point. As far as the final conclusion, again, concluded that the ice had been present for about 24 hours prior to the time of incident and had been present prior to the snow that fell on the date of the incident. Okay, so a few takeaways just to go over for this particular case study. Hopefully it goes without saying that obviously providing a weather expert with some case details can be very helpful to understanding, for them to understand the unique aspects of that case and be able to incorporate them into their report. In this case, the testimony was able to support, the formation and likelihood of solid ice underneath the snow based on the engineer showing that there was a depression, and based on the fact that I was able to determine that 1.5 inches of rain had fallen about 4 days prior. Also, just a few general takeaways that really only a qualified weather expert can do a site-specific analysis for a case. They're the ones that have the knowledge, experience, education. They can interpret all of the weather data and information for a site-specific location. I know Kim touched on this, and we've mentioned it, that data is out there. We live in a world where you can pretty much get your hands on anything you want, but if you don't have the knowledge or the experience to interpret that for a site-specific location, you're always going to get challenged by a good attorney on the other side that's going to say, well, that's great, that's for an airport 5, 6, 7 miles away. How do you know that that's what happened at the location as well? A weather expert is able to understand and look at more than just that data to be able to pinpoint for that specific location. It's also important to get your own weather expert. In this case, if you had just gone with the other weather experts' analysis as a plaintiff attorney, you'd basically have to concede that it's snowing at the time and you have a problem with trying to argue that case. So again, it's also it's always important. Because another weather expert might just be conveniently leaving out information that maybe not helpful to their side, but they also might have some inaccuracies in their report as well. And that's always a good thing to run by another weather expert. Okay, so that's a cold season case study. Shifting gears to talk a little bit about a warm season case study that I worked on. This is a flooding case. And again, I did change or amend and omit a few of the details on this case just to protect some confidentiality of the parties that were involved in this case. As far as the background on this particular case, there was a property where there was some excavation done, and it was located at a higher elevation than an adjacent property that happened to have a pond on it. Now, months after this excavation took place, they had kind of changed the lay of the land. And months later, a thunderstorm caused that adjacent property owner's pond to flood. And not only did it flood the pond and kind of mess up the actual pond, but also flooded onto the property, ruined some property, even some structures. So there was some big issues that occurred from this flooding event. Now the pond owner downhill sued the uphill property owner, basically claiming that the excavation that they had done led to the flooding and the damage. And we were hired here at CompuWeather, and I was brought in for the defense to determine and investigate rainfall amounts and kind of how unusual or how typical would this type of rainfall event have been, because if it was just a run-of-the-mill rainstorm, then you might be able to pin it on the excavation. However, if it was some crazy storm that you wouldn't expect to have happen, it gets a little bit more difficult to argue at that point. Okay, so what was I asked to do? Again, I was asked to investigate the amount of rain that fell during the period in question, asked to determine how often an event of this magnitude would be expected to occur at this precise location. And for that, we have what's called average recurrence interval, generally accepted climatological research. In short, ARI is what it's abbreviated. And in layman's terms, that's basically like, what year event is this storm? Is it a 100-year rainstorm? Was it a 50-year, 10-year? How often would you expect this to occur based on this climatological research? And when applying the average recurrence interval research, two critical pieces of information must be considered for it to be able to be used. And I think everybody would agree that rainfall amount is key and important, but just as important is the duration that rainfall fell over. Because if we have a 2-inch rainstorm over a 24-hour period, that's going to be a lot different of an impact than a 2-inch rainstorm over a 15-minute period. That's going to be a much more significant problem or issue based on the fact that it's coming down much quicker. Okay, so the meteorological investigation process for this particular case, again, I'm not going to go into every single one of these again in detail since we already talked about a lot of this information is similar. But nearby hourly and daily weather observations were reviewed, National Weather Service alerts, advisories, special weather statements, and reports. In this particular case, a very useful piece of information is what's called public information statements, which the National Weather Service will put out during rainfall situations, or most of the time during heavier rainfall, and they'll provide more rainfall reports than what you might be able to get through the hourly or daily weather observations. Surface weather maps, again, to see large-scale features. This happened to be a cold front, a thunderstorm complex that happened to be moving through along that frontal boundary. National Weather Service storm events write-ups. These are the severe and unusual write-ups after an event by the National Weather Service. There happened to be one for this event. Happened to provide a few extra rainfall reports and some other information that could be very useful for this particular case. Satellite imagery, not so useful in this case because we're really talking about rainfall. Cloud cover wasn't really that critical or important, but it is something we can look at. Most important was Doppler radar data. And Doppler radar data was used because this is a fairly rural location. There were no rain gauges even really close to this location. We're talking about a thunderstorm complex. And in those situations, you can have, pretty drastic difference in rainfall amounts over fairly short distances. So Doppler radar ends up being important for not only timing, when did it start, when did it stop, intensity, but Doppler radar also has a derived product that's called storm total precipitation estimates product. And it basically takes the intensity and it determines rainfall rates based on the intensities at different times, uses algorithms to estimate the amount of rainfall that occurred over a location. And it is site specific, but again, it's estimates based on an algorithm. It's not, actual ground reports, so you do have to be a little careful, and I'll touch on how we handle that a little later on here. But again, the average recurrence interval tables for this incident location were also reviewed, and those are important to review as well. Summary of my analysis and findings for this particular case. Again, I used Doppler radar to determine the rainfall timing, intensity, and also the amounts from the start of the event to the end of the event at the precise location. Now, again, I indicated that the Doppler radar storm total precipitation product provides estimates of rainfall over large areas and can give us site-specific totals. But again, those are estimates. So what you have to do in those particular cases is you need to ground truth those or look at reporting sites in the area to determine whether or not those estimates are reasonable and accurate and can be relied upon. So in this particular case, I took all the rain gauge measurements in the area, compared them to the Doppler radar estimates that were provided by the Doppler radar. Turns out it was a very reliable and accurate case, and the Doppler radar could be used for this case. In this particular case, at the end of the day, the ultimate finding here was that it was determined that the rainfall on this particular day occurred over a 3-hour period when approximately 6.32 inches of rain fell. That's a pretty hefty amount of rain over 3 hours. So the average recurrence interval based on the research for this location for a 3-hour rainfall amount of 6.32 inches is between a 200 and a 500 year event. So that's, if you want to play with percent chances, that's between a 0.2 and a 0.5% chance of occurring. It's not even a full percent chance of occurring in any given year. Now, as a weather expert, I don't speak subjectively. I'm very objective. If I was to present this to a jury, I would say just that. I would say, that it's a 200 to 500 year event, has a 0.2 to 0.5% chance of occurring. Attorneys have a little bit more freedom. They can be a little bit more subjective, and they could take that and they could, talk about that in any way they want. But I think most jurors, if I was to take my weather expert hat off, most jurors would agree that is pretty unusual, and I'm not expecting that to happen very often. Okay, so on this particular case, they did hire a weather expert on the other side, and it wouldn't be a full forensic case that I'm working on if I didn't have a few challenges from another weather expert who also reviewed this weather data and came up with their own analysis. In this particular case, I was challenged on a few things. I'm going to go over how I rebutted those. Also going to cover a couple of oversights from the other weather expert because I did review their work as well. But the first challenge was that the opposing expert had determined that 6 inches of rain occurred with the event, which is less than my 6.32, but I think we would all agree that that's pretty close. They're both pretty hefty rainfall totals. But when I dug a little bit deeper and looked at the other weather experts' report, I determined that they were using a lower resolution and more outdated Doppler storm total precipitation estimates product. To be honest, I don't even know that this product exists anymore, that you can get it. I think they might have decommissioned it. But at the time, it was secondary to a higher resolution storm total precipitation data product that we would rely on. And I've included at the bottom of this slide a couple of snapshots of the lower resolution data on the left that the opposing expert was using, and then the higher resolution data on the right that I was reviewing. And you can see the lower resolution data provides basically categorical ranges of rainfall. The white dot on these images is the location of the incident. The blue shading on this is between a 5 and 6 inch rainfall total estimated for those areas, which again is an inch range. And then the yellow area is from a 6 to 8 inch rainfall total for all the areas that were within that shading. And I believe, it looks pretty obvious that basically what the other weather expert did was say, oh, it looks like it's on the boundary of the 5 to 6 versus the 6 to 8. Excuse me. So that would put the rainfall total at about 6 inches. Now, the higher resolution data on the right actually provides the data, and you can see that there's a lot more pixels in that, and it's just a higher resolution image. I'm able to use my mouse or cursor to go over the data, and it actually will provide rainfall estimates for each one of those pixels for, to the 100th of an inch. So you can see the white dot there, that ends up being about 6.32, well, not about, it ends up being 6.32 inches of estimated rainfall based on the Doppler storm total precipitation estimates product using the higher resolution data. So I was able to effectively argue that data was outdated. Challenge 2 was that the opposing expert evaluated the rainfall over 24 hours instead of using the 3 hour period that I had determined the rainfall fell over, which was pretty obvious. And if you evaluate, again, a 6 inch total, which is what they had, over 24 hours, you're going to get a much lower average recurrence interval at 10 to 25 years, which is what they had. And my assessment was 200 to 500 years based on it occurring over 3 hours. This was pretty easy to show in a rebuttal report because the Doppler radar data clearly shows that there's no precipitation up through about 3 p.m. and then between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. you end up with all of the rainfall for the day falling during that 3 hour window. So it became very obvious that it was not a 24-hour event. It was indeed a 3 hour event and should have been treated that way. And this just kind of shows, this is a little snippet of the average recurrence interval tables and kind of shows in the first column there is a 3 hour duration and a 24-hour duration. The red X would be what they determined based on 24 hours, and being 6 inches, it falls between 5.14 and 6.41 inches of rain, which ends up being across the top of the table. You can see the year event or the average recurrence interval, 5, 10, 25, 50, lands between the 10 and 25 year. And then you can see the first full row there where there's 6.32. If you follow that all the way over on a 3 hour basis and look at the blue X, that's what I determined, and the 6.32 falls between the 5.51 and 6.62 inch totals in the research. Actually, it happens to be a little bit closer to the 500 year, but because it's in between, I would always say that it's between a 200 and a 500 year event. Last challenge that I was challenged on was that the opposing expert said that hail occurred with these thunderstorms and that likely contaminated the Doppler radar estimates that were used, and that they were perhaps too high and unreliable. First thing is, they came up with 6 inches and used similar data, so it was kind of strange that they brought this up. But I also had done, when reviewing the actual rainfall reports, did notice that there were some that actually also reported hail, and that it was pretty obvious that the rainfall totals were close to the Doppler radar estimates, and that therefore there was no hail contamination. And just to kind of take a side note on that, hail can contaminate the estimates because it's a very effective reflector of Doppler radar energy. So what can happen is the Doppler sends out a signal. If it hits hailstones, it sends back crazy high returns. That's interpreted as heavy rainfall, and then that goes into the algorithm that ends up being crazy high rainfall estimates for those areas, when in fact it could have been hail. I did an analysis to rule that out for this particular case, and that's how I rebutted that challenge. Okay, so the outcome on this particular case was that, as we know, a lot of these cases don't go all the way to trial. I prepare as if every case is going all the way to trial. But both experts' analysis and rebuttals were disclosed, ended up settling, and did end up actually settling fairly favorably for the defense from what I was told in this particular case. Takeaways for this, very similar to the last case, that really, you should get a qualified weather expert. I don't know too many attorneys out there that are going to be able to interpret Doppler radar data and really, get a site-specific analysis like what was done here without a degree in meteorology. So you need the knowledge, the experience, and education to be able to interpret all of this data and provide the site-specific analysis. And again, just like the last case, it is always important to get your own weather expert, because relying on another weather expert's work could certainly mislead you, or if we looked at the other weather experts' work in this case, you might just end up with a 10 to 25 year event when it's very clearly a much more significant event than that. So thank you all for listening. Hopefully that was informational and helpful. And I think we do have a little bit of time now for some questions, if anybody had any questions for either myself or Kim.
Steve, I have to interrupt, and I'm sorry. I have to give the program code for everyone.
Sure.
The program code is FOR11. That's FOR11. And I'll also put the program code in the chat.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Karen.
Thank you.
Steve and Kimberly, I have a question. Mr. Festa has been messaging me repeatedly. He's an attorney who practices in Little Falls, and he wants to know, he's planning on a trip to Turks and Caicos. He wants to know whether he can go waterboarding. Oh, no, he wants to do some waterboarding on one of his clients. I got that mistaken. No, he wants to know whether he could spend the 5 sun-filled days there without any threat of precipitation. Can you give us a report on that, and how much does it cost?
That would be considered forecasting, which might be a little difficult to do. It depends on how far out. But
I
can
wish,
guarantee.
Joe, I
the
wish.
one thing I can do is I can guarantee you that the weather is going to be nicer than it's going to be here the next week or so.
All right. Well,
I think Joe's talking about wishful thinking on my part.
yeah. These are busy
It's not
times.
hurricane season yet, so you're going, if it was September, October, would say, watch out for hurricanes, but you're good now.
Good. In any event, folks, and I'm sorry to joke around here. Does anyone have any questions? This was a fascinating presentation, by the way, Steve and Kim, and sometimes it's the little things that matter, right? And the things that we don't think about that might turn the tide on your side, whether you're plaintiff or defense. So, any other questions? Nothing. No questions. Matt Cavalier, you must have had one of these cases back in the day where whether it rained or not was material.
Yeah, both criminal and civil. So that was what caught my eye on this, and I appreciate the information. And I have to admit, I didn't use CompuWeather. I kind of used free services, and I was able. So far I have been able to sneak it in. But I've always had that worry in the back of my head that someone was going to challenge it and I'd be caught short. So I do appreciate the information from Steve, especially, and Kim. Sorry, I didn't mean to leave you out.
That's okay.
Yeah. Well, on that
Thank
point,
you.
perhaps I had to step out for a minute or two. What are the price points here? You can get a verbal, you can get a full report, you can get something in between. What kind of price points we're talking? And forgive me if you addressed this and I wasn't paying attention at that moment.
Oh, no, we didn't address it.
Kim, before you start that, we should probably say that's at the current, since this is being recorded, at the current time. Obviously, that could change in the future. But yeah, Kim will give you some pricing for right now as far as, what our prices are.
March 11th for the record, 2026.
Yes. So a phone consultation is a flat fee of $545. So it's a good way, to get an initial opinion on a case without having anything in writing. And if you do want to report afterwards, no obligation to do a report, get a report, anything else after the consult. But if you do, that'll be done at our consulting rate, which is $380 per hour. And a typical report, is usually like 2 to 3 hours of work more if you need us to review and incorporate documents like deposition transcripts. That's kind of for a standard 3-day report. If you just want to go straight to a report, that's $595 for a report covering up to 3 days. So, it's more cost effective, but a lot of people prefer going the consult route since, then you know what you're getting into. You're not going to get a report that says something that, could potentially hurt your case. But yeah, so that's kind of, the price point for, the report, a standard report for a slip and fall, as well as a fee for a consult.
And your hourly fee is the same for trial days, or do you charge a flat fee for half days or whole days?
Yeah, so for testimony, we charge a flat fee of $3,000 for the appearance. And New Jersey is considered local, so we don't charge extra for travel or anything like that. Since that's considered to be a local area. Depositions, there's a half day or a full day fee. It's $1,500 for a half day, up to 4 hours deposition. And if it were to be a full day, which luckily most of our experts depositions are not full day, but if so, if it goes over 4 hours, then it would be 3,000 for that as well. But anyone who wants, more information about pricing, you can feel free to get in touch and I can, send you our price list. So you have it all in front of you. And yeah, my email address is kfisher, KFISHER @compuweather.com. If anyone, wants any additional pricing information, any other information in general, even if you just want, Steve's CV to have on hand, just you can send me an email and I'd be happy to send that to you. Or if you have a case that you could use an expert on.
Well, again, forgive me if you addressed this, but I heard Steve talk about certification, certified records. I know that there are statutes that permit the introduction of some certified records. I remember back in the day, the maps and the 1,000-foot drug cases, and I'm sure there's more of this in civil law than criminal. Is there a statute? Is there a rule of practice that permits the certified record to come in to make a certain weather-related point in our state, to your knowledge?
Yeah, I can answer that, but well, I can try to answer that. I think from what I understand, and this is more in the legal world, probably more the attorneys on this webinar would probably know better. But the way I understand it is that certified weather records can actually be admissible in the courts without a weather expert. If you have a weather expert, the weather records don't actually have to be certified technically. The weather expert has to testify to the fact that those are generally accepted by the peers in their field of meteorology. So,
Yeah.
I could tell you a story about a judge that I did. There was a challenge from the other attorney on the other side. I don't believe they necessarily understood that and basically forced to get the weather records certified. So I always encourage every attorney, if they're going to trial, just spend a little bit of extra money to have the certified weather records. Then there's no confusion if somebody doesn't fully understand the process or things are a little bit different. Certified weather records, again, I touched on in the presentation, they're great for an attorney to bring in without a weather expert, but all the other side really has to say at that point is, how does this apply to the location?
Right.
You're kind of dead in the water.
Well, thank you, Kimberly and Steve. Anyone else as we wind up? Mr. Aquaviva? No? Okay. Karen, I turn it back.
Not yet. Not yet, Joe. I haven't encountered any construction or zoning cases just yet.
Okay. Karen?
On behalf of the Passaic County Bar Association, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Kimberly, for this informative seminar. We really appreciate your time. Thanks, guys.
Yes,
Thanks so much for having us. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Stay well. Bye, everybody.
Karen, is this going up in the cloud? This recording?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So I may
Okay.
be, I don't know about today, but I'll be texting you because, you may have to do that 2-factor thing for me to get the file,
No problem. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.